So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for Fintech Summer Sessions 24. My name is Sagar Shah. I'm part of the Fintech Saudi team, and it's great to be back here. I can't believe it's been nearly a year since we had Fintech Summer Sessions 23. Great to see so many of you have joined. Thank you very much for joining. If this is the first time you've joined, welcome to Fintech Summer Sessions. You are in for a treat. If you're back with us and you joined us before for previous sessions, then welcome back and thank you very much for joining us again. My colleagues, Kareem and Nazar, you would have had a great session from them on Sunday, which was an introduction to FinTech, introduction to FinTech Summer Sessions, what's happening in Saudi. And from this week, from this Tuesday, and for the next 10 Tuesdays, we're going to be now deep diving into 10 of the most important topics in FinTech going on at the moment. So really excited about the criteria and the schedule and the program that we have over the next 10 weeks, and really looking forward to getting to know all of you over those 10 weeks as well. Today, week one, really pleased to have you all, and we're going to be covering a really important topic, which is financial inclusion. So it's a great topic, and it was actually chosen by yourselves. So what we did at the end of FinTech Summer Sessions 23 was we sent a survey to ask, well, what does everybody want to know? What topics would you like to cover? And the top topic which was asked for was financial inclusion. So the team has worked really hard to try and find a speaker to match that. And we're really pleased to have Carl Manland with us here as well. So Carl is the head of inclusive impact and sustainability at Visa Samia, a wealth of knowledge on financial inclusion. I've had several meetings with him to talk about financial inclusion. So really pleased to have you here with us, Carl. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here today. So again, as per previous sessions, we'll have the presentations, then we'll open it up for Q&A. And then if we've got some time at the end, you can also ask anything related to FinTech Saudi and FinTech Saudi. So add any Q&As that you have in the Q&A box. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Carl.
Sagar, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and happy to be able to contribute to this discussion. So we'll try and make it as interactive as possible. So even though we say there's Q&A, please feel free to make sure that you have your comments coming in and your questions as well. So we can move to the next slide. And what I thought I would start doing is look at the question of financial inclusion probably from these four different sections. If we can get to the next slide. So the first one, of course, is what is financial inclusion? And I thought, you can do a definition, but we have a short video, about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, that will give you a tangible example of what this represents. We'll look at what's happening around the world, what the progress has been, a few case studies, and really what is your role in that journey of financial inclusion. Next slide. Next. So if you look at the definition, it's a broad definition that anyone can go and look on. It's on the World Bank website. But there are 5 words that are being highlighted. The first one is about it has to be useful. So the process of getting people access needs to be useful to them and not necessarily for the entity that's providing. So many of you may have, for example, a card. That card is an access to financial services, but it has to be useful to you so that you actually make use of the card, as simple as that. Affordability is an important element. What kind of needs do they meet? And when we talk about needs, you think about transaction, payment, savings, credit, insurance, for example. And 2 important points, which I think are close to my heart, is about the responsibility of the individual community that is using financial services. And it has to be done in a sustainable way. So let me show you an example in practice. We have a video for you, and I hope you will enjoy it and that will inspire you to think about financial inclusion differently. Next.
বাংলাদেশের ক্যাটেল সেক্টরটা এখনো তো আপনার মোর দেন 90% আসলে আমাদের বাংলাদেশের ক্যাটেল সেক্টরটা এখনো তো আপনার মোর দেন 90% আসলে আমাদের রুরাল এরিয়াতে। যেমন আজ থেকে যদি আমরা আরো 10 বছর আগের কথা ধরি, অনেকে মনে করছিল বিকাশ হয়তো বা গ্রামের মানুষ একসেপ্ট করবে না, বাট এখন কিন্তু গ্রামের মানুষই সবচেয়ে বেশি বিকাশ ব্যবহার করতেছে। তো সুতরাং আমার কাছে মনে হয় অ্যাভেলেবিলিটি বাড়লে, একটু যদি পারসুয়েশন বাড়ে, মানুষকে যদি ঠিক মতো বোঝানো হয় হোয়াট আর দ্য অ্যাডভান্টেজেস অফ ডিজিটাল পেমেন্ট সিস্টেম, অনেক ব্যাপক আসলে কাজ করার সুযোগ আছে আমাদের এই সেক্টরে।
আবার আমাদের প্রথম কথা হচ্ছে আমরা কমার্সকে এম্পাওয়ার করতে চাচ্ছি থ্রু ফিনান্সিয়াল ইনক্লুশন, এবং যেভাবে তারা আমাদেরকে বলেছিল যে এটার মধ্যে কোনো রকম হ্যাসেল বা কোনো রকম থাকবে না, একটা সিমলেস, একটা সিকিউরড সার্ভিস।
এই সমাধানটা পাওয়ার পরে আমরা এই প্রোডাক্ট ডিজাইনে কাজ শুরু করলাম ভিসার সাথে জয়েন্টলি, এবং এই প্রোডাক্টটা আমরা লঞ্চ করলাম। এবং এখানে কিন্তু ডেবিট এবং ক্রেডিট দুইটা কার্ডই রয়েছে। তো ওরা ওই কার্ডটা নিয়ে ট্রানজেকশন গুলো আমাদের বিভিন্ন ডিস্ট্রিবিউশন আউটলেট, যেমন ব্রাঞ্চ আছে, এডেন ব্যাংকিং নেটওয়ার্ক আছে, এমনকি আমরা যদি পস টার্মিনাল দিয়ে দিতে পারি তাহলে কিন্তু তারা তাদের দোকানেও কিন্তু এই কার্ডটা ইউজ করতে পারে।
তারপরে হচ্ছে স্মার্ট ফার্মার্স কার্ডের মাধ্যমে আমাদের একটা ক্রেডিট লিমিট আছে, আমরা একটা ছোট্ট একটা ক্রেডিট প্রান্তিক খামারিরা এনজয় করতে পারবে। তারপরে এটা তো ডেবিট কার্ড হিসাবে ব্যবহার করা যাবে। তো ওই স্মার্ট ফার্মার্স কার্ডের মাধ্যমে এজেন্ট ব্যাংক থেকেও টাকাটা উত্তোলন করা যাবে। তো এটা কিন্তু অনেক বড় একটা সুবিধা আসলে আমাদের এই সেক্টরের জন্য।
অনেকে মনে করেন জাল টাকা ঢুকাইয়া দেয়, টাকা গুনিয়ে নিতে সমস্যা হয়, তাড়াতাড়ি করে টাকাটা নিয়ে যায়, আসার পথে মনে করেন ছিনতাইবাজের ভয় থাকে।
এই সুবিধা আছে ভাই, আমার আমার নামের উপরে কার্ডটা আছে, কার্ডটা আছে, আমি জানি মনে করেন আমার একটা মান সম্মান আছে বা ফার্মের খামার হিসাবে কার্ডটা লেনদেন করে আমারও নিশ্চিত রইলো, আমারও যে মনে করেন আমিও নিশ্চিন্ত রইলাম যে টাকাটা আমার ব্যাংকে রয়েছে, লেনদেন ব্যাংকের মারফত।
ছোট বড় সব খামারি ব্যাংকিং চ্যানেলে তাদের ফুড স্টেপ তৈরি করার সময় তারা অনেক রকমের সুবিধা ইনশাআল্লাহ গ্রহণ করতে পারবে।
Thank you very much. So as you think about the stories of the cattle sellers, the stories that they express and how their life has changed by entering the financial services, that's an interesting example of financial inclusion. We move to the next slide. And when you're thinking about financial inclusion, the one element that is always important is what problem are you trying to solve in society, and for who are you trying to solve that problem for? It shouldn't be something that you try to solve for yourself, but you should really have those elements in mind in terms of, does it solve the problem? If you go back to the definition that we shared at the beginning, and is it done in a way that is going to improve the life of the individual? We can move to the next slide. Yeah, you can go back, if you go back to that definition, yeah, very good, do that. And that example basically shows how useful it was for the cattle sellers. The affordability, because they're no longer going to be losing cash. The ability for that cash to be stolen is gone. So affordability, that's a key part. Do they have the needs? Yes, because they now manage to get a form of credit. And was it delivered in a responsible and sustainable way? It meets all the elements in the definition. So every time you're thinking about financial inclusion, so if you're in the fintech space or in the food space, you need to go back to the definition and ask yourself always, what problem am I trying to solve for the community? We can move to the slide after the video. So when you read about financial inclusion and role that it plays, I only put 3 of the 17 sustainable development goals, but 7 of the 17 actually are being supported by the work that is being done to improve financial inclusion. I'm giving you 4 of them here. The first one is around education. Quality education is extremely important, but in the context of financial inclusion, you can think of the ability to improve your financial education. And why financial education is important? Because it helps every individual to be in a better position to manage their finances in a responsible manner. And this is very key. We live in a region of the world where some people do have access compared to other parts. So what can we do with the fact that access is present? is to ensure that everyone has access to quality education, not only from a financial education perspective, but education in general, because that create opportunities for others, especially many of you that are thinking about creating your own fintechs or creating opportunities for others. Education is key. And we don't always have to think only in terms of formal education, but if people have access to learning and development that allows them to improve their life, it's equally important. The second goal that I want you to pay attention to is goal number 8, which is about really getting a decent work and economic growth. These two are extremely important in the context of many young people today, for example, joining the workforce on the African continent and other parts of the world. And we need to make sure that they have a quality education on one hand, but in addition to quality education, they have that access to the decent work and economic growth that is going to be important. And one element, one aspect also financial inclusion is reducing inequalities. So the ability, for example, for the cattle farmers to have access to credit, access to finances, because now they're using digital financial services, and this is the language of the financial sector, that ability to record the transaction on a digital platform, then send a signal to the financial system that this individual is able to sell X number of cattle. We've seen over a period of time how many he's able to do, what is the cash flow. Therefore, we can afford that person to have access to credit, for example, or a loan facility differently. So financial inclusion needs to, again, to serve the purpose. It has to be useful to the individual. Next slide. And when we think about the role that we play in society, we need to also assess what has been the progress around the world. So Findex, it's a global measurement, global index that is done by the World Bank and other partners, which sort of tracks the progress of financial education. Yes, there is improvement around the world, but you still remain places where our focus and attention needs to make, simply because if you think about population. So as you can see on the top left, you have India that is listed as one of the largest countries in terms of population in the world. A lot of progress has been made in the country, especially when you're thinking about UPI, which is a United Payment Infrastructure, on which now they're layering on this opportunities for individuals to have access to the health records. So you then see that financial inclusion represents a sort of a bedrock on which you can build other opportunities for individuals. We can go to the next slide. If we deep down, if we look specifically into the MENA region, we can see in the MENA region which are the countries where we still have to work harder to make sure that financial inclusion improves in these countries. And the reason why it's important is because it gives individuals an opportunity to participate in the digital economy. Many of you remember that during COVID-19, we started to spend more of our time online, but also using resources online to be able to achieve what we're trying, exactly, for example, deliveries at home and so on. So the digital economy, we've also seen that SMEs, small, medium business, small, medium enterprises, or small, medium businesses that were not able to sell online because people had to be, during lockdown, could not go out and actually have access. Being able to pay online and receive payment online was critical to the success of businesses. So financial inclusion has really a tangible benefit. It's not something that we want to do for the sake of doing it, but it really gives the opportunity to individuals to participate fully in the digital economy. And I think this is critical. Next slide. Now, I'm giving a slide that shows you in terms of the progress that has been made by Saudi Arabia and also the US over the past. You can please press twice. They should appear. No, press on the, yeah, again, thank you. So as you can see, since 2011, for both countries, there's a clear progression. So in 2011, when it was done, we were at 46% in Saudi, we're 87% in the US. But Saudi went from, in 2011, in the past 10 years, from 46 to 74%. This is a massive increase in the way financial inclusion is happening in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The US started from a higher base, 87%, and now they're sitting about 94%. Next slide. We're moving to look at what's happening, for example, in South Africa and also in Nigeria. And if you compare these two countries, you can see Nigeria has a population of about 220 million people. South Africa is sitting about 65 million people. And you can see the difference in these two countries. Probably one has to do with population, but also there's a question of infrastructure. The banking infrastructure in South Africa is a little bit more advanced than one you have in Nigeria. But it also means that the opportunity for experiences and learning what is worked well in South Africa to benefit the Nigerian market exists. So when you think of a company that I work for, a lot of the work that we do is also ensuring that the technology, the knowledge that we acquire in different parts of the world is being leveraged to advance financial inclusion in other parts of the world. And that learning opportunity is extremely important. Like today, what we're having in session and talking about financial inclusion is really, by the end of the day, how do you use this learning? How do you can move to the next slide. How do you use the fact that there is progress to start to think about what kind of solution do you want to create? And this slide can give you some indication of how, in terms of behavior. If you look at the question in terms of how do people solve problems in terms of emergency when they need emergency money, you can see the difference in the high-income countries compared to the developing countries. Family remains, of course, the first point of contact, but you can see that people rely a little bit more on family than they rely in the developing world than they rely in the high-income economies. But if you look at the bottom one in terms of any source, again, it's higher in the high-income economies compared to the developing economies. So if you ask yourself then, okay, if I have to produce a solution to help individuals that face an emergency, if we think again about the definition of financial inclusion, about the ability to save, for example, you look here, you can see that what you have in terms of savings, in terms of emergency, when people need to have access, where does it sit on that sort of map? If you look then at these options that exist, the question then becomes for you as somebody who's trying to find a solution, how do I find a solution that meets the needs of the clients when they face that particular situation? And in a way, when you're thinking about financial inclusion, you need to ask yourself the question, what problem am I trying to solve? And if you identify the problem, part of it can be resolved through the solution that you find. I'm not saying that it will all be easy to find a solution, but the first part is to identify what the problem is. Next slide. And I want to then give you 3 examples, one from Saudi Arabia, one from Egypt, and one from Kyrgyzstan. The first one from Saudi Arabia comes from a partner that we have, which is doing excellent work in the kingdom, STC Pay, which has recently, you can move to the next slide, which has recently moved to become STC Bank. And if you look at what they've been able to do, is that ability to leverage the opportunity that the pandemic offered to provide individual and small, medium businesses with an ability to pay and to get paid. So taking cashless, the cashless economy, you can think about cashless economy as a synonym of financial inclusion, because you can get the opportunity for individuals to access services that they may not have been able to access because they were not on the digital economy. And this example gives us a clear view of what is possible to do by leveraging, again, infrastructure. So you keep in mind that financial inclusion builds on infrastructure that exists or needs to be created. In this case, you have a platform of the mobile network operators on which you layer the technology of being able to receive payment using tap-to-pay technology. So tap-to-pay, many of you probably have used it when you use your phone to tap. You can either tap another phone as a device, it's there enabled, or you can tap the POS or the machine that you find in the supermarket or at the merchant. Next slide. The other example takes us to Egypt. And when you look then at the role that merchants, so when you think of a merchant, you need to think of someone who's selling something. The role that merchants play in societies, a lot of them are women. And the ability to give women that option to be able to receive cash directly is extremely important in the context of improving the ability to take care of the children, for example, to take care of education, to take care of food and other elements that are important in the context of improving the livelihoods. So financial inclusion, again, needs to tie with something that is important. How do we improve the livelihood of individuals when they get access to better revenue? Because the ability then to be able to trace and track is easier when you do it on a digital platform, because you can then analyze and assess how your revenue is growing or not growing what are you selling that is not necessarily, can move to the next example, which is one of my favorite example in the Dordoy market in Kyrgyzstan. So Dordoy market in Kyrgyzstan has about 60,000 merchants. Imagine the number of people that go to the market on a daily basis. And imagine the opportunity that it represents for a seller to be able to increase their sale, because an individual, a tourist may come and they do not necessarily have cash, but they have a card or they have another means of payment. And because they're now modernizing the way they transact, you can increase the sale that you're going to have. You can also make sure that you can create a marketplace where you can sell your products online, and people may not necessarily have to come to the market, but they can be delivered. So you can imagine then what happens when you create new opportunities, because you move from a place where people have to come directly to the market, but now they can also order online, which means that you're creating a new market for individuals to be doing the logistics part, the transportation part. So financial inclusion, if I want to summarize, is that ability. Yes, there's a definition that I gave you, but think about it as that links that connect different pieces of the same equation for really one purpose, to improve livelihoods of individuals and communities. And improving the livelihood of individuals in communities is extremely important in the context of ensuring that we leave no one behind. And you probably heard that expression before, or leaving no one behind. You can move to the next slide. Leaving no one behind, and earlier I spoke about the fact that you have 7 of the 17 MDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that are actually enabling the opportunity for us to think about better financial services for all, but also better education, as I showed them for SDG number 4. You can think about SDG number 8, about economic growth and work, decent work. And then the third one, I cannot remember now, 4.8. I can't remember, probably come back. Now, what is your role on that journey of financial inclusion? A lot of people are online today. We are online now having a conversation. The reason why this is possible is because it's a safe and secure environment. So before we play the video, I want to ask you a question. When you're thinking about financial services and you think about your role in making sure that financial inclusion is accessible to more people, but also it's safe and secure, what is your role? And we asked that question to Generation Alpha. Listen to the video and then we'll go into the Q&A session. You can play video, please.
هو الأمن اللي بيحفظ صورنا، خصوصيتنا، يعني الرسائل اللي احنا بنبعتها. جهازك الإلكتروني زي التلفون أو الأيباد أو الكمبيوتر بيحميك تستعمل. I have heard of it, and I know that human fraud is if you get your credit or debit card stolen and somebody else makes purchases on it.
Oui, j'ai un ami qui a été victime de l'utilisation de ses données personnelles et de sa carte bancaire. Ses parents ont dû porter plainte à la police.
مرة وأنا صغيرة نزلت تطبيق يعني معين واخترق بياناتي وتاري بعت رسالات لأصدقائي، يعني مش أنا اللي بعتهم بس يعني مخلة بالأخلاق
If someone is asking you too many questions like your email, password, personal things, you can be tricked.
De diverses manières. Premièrement, je pense que lorsque ça apparaît de façon inattendue, par exemple, on vous dit que vous avez gagné un concours alors que vous n'aviez pas participé.
Check if the website is safe and make sure, like, to ask your parents maybe if it's safe. Ну, например, тебе приходят странные сообщения по поводу твоего банка. Я для начала позвоню банку, узнаю всю информацию и не буду сразу отвечать «да», чтобы, например, согласиться или что-нибудь еще. Но когда ты маленький и все такое, лучше пойти к родителям. Они разбираются в этом лучше.
إنه لازم تكون الباسبور تاعتنا قوية وسهل حفظها عشان يعني نحن ما ننساها في أي وقت، وكمان ما نعطيها حتى لأقرب الأصدقاء، لأنه يمكن هذول الأصدقاء بس بدهم منك إنه ياخذوا الباسبور وخلاص.
Des mots de passe difficiles à identifier. Ensuite, tu fais des achats sur des sites sûrs et vérifiés.
Because if it is easy, everyone can guess it.
Éviter que d'autres personnes comme les arnaqueurs ne prennent le contrôle de nos comptes pour nous arnaquer. Je crois que les empreintes digitales et la reconnaissance faciale sont plus sûres que les mots de passe.
So thank you very much. I hope you found this insightful, and happy to answer questions or take comments as well.
Thank you very much, Carl. Really appreciated your time and love the videos and love the sort of context of financial inclusion. I think it's a really important topic that we need to be aware of. Just a few questions. A lot of questions have been coming through, and keep the Q&As coming through. I'll try and cover as many as I can. Just the first question I have is, what do we mean by financial inclusion in Saudi Arabia, right? Because most people have a bank account. Most people have, the e-wallet payments. So where do we see the opportunities in Saudi Arabia? Where do we need to have more financial inclusion?
I think it's around the responsible financial inclusion, because there was a comment in the chat about MADA. So the government has created a platform to allow citizens to be able to transact. So where do the international cards come in? It's when you leave the country and you're traveling, and that ability to be able to use your card outside. So responsible, and that's why I ended the talk with you around cybersecurity. Because the responsibility to be safe and secure online is everyone's responsibility, because we are strong as the weakest link. If someone uses financial services and go onto, let's say, a website which is not secure, or they use the card in a way that's inappropriate, it means that they're going to create a window into the system that will create risk for everyone. But cybersecurity is something which is extremely important for everyone to understand, and everyone's role to play in that responsible financial inclusion. Because as you said, most people have access. So it's not an access question, it's the ability to be responsible.
And that's a really good point, but how do you address that, right? Because if you're talking about financial inclusion, you're typically talking about people which have not looked at digital literacy, they've not used technology to make financial transactions before. And now we're sort of saying to them, hey, this is much more better for you. It's more inclusive. It means you don't have to worry about cash and cash being stolen, but you're opening yourselves up to other risks, such as cybersecurity risks. So is that an education point, or how do we typically get around that?
I mean, part of it has to do with financial education, and what is your ability to understand the means that you have at your disposal. So that definitely, so you can have, and that's something that Visa provides, and we had those conversations in terms of how do you make sure that more people have access to responsible financial education. The second one, which I think is important in the context of financial education, is the understanding of cybersecurity. And that one may seem obvious, but it's not necessarily that obvious and simple. Because the more people that are safe and secure, and then we at Visa use artificial intelligence. I saw a comment in the chat. We use AI, and we're using AI to make sure that you have that ability to safeguard individuals. So let's take a very simple example. If you use your card in a place that the system does not recognize, for example, you are in Saudi today, I'm in Amman, and my card is being used, for example, in Papua New Guinea. The system will not recognize and will send a signal, an SMS. And that ability to be able to to be responsible and safe online is really part of the key, because more people need to believe that the digital economy is safe for people to participate. And it can only be safe if we all play that role of being the guardians of that space. Because you need the merchant. Let's say I would like to buy a handicraft that is made by a Saudi artist, but I cannot travel to Saudi because, let's say, for that purpose of illustration, I live in South Africa. If I go on the digital platform and I place that order, I need to trust that the platform, the payment, and the logistics behind it will allow me to get that craft from the Saudi artist. But it's the trust in that system which is generated by different partners, including the regulation that are put in place by the banks and applied by the banks from the central bank, the rules that govern the way payments are being distributed, and how do we maintain that trust? That's a critical piece of the equation.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's that trust aspect, and this is for any budding entrepreneurs there. I think there's a lot of opportunity there around maintaining and building that trust in a digital ecosystem. So that's a really, really good point, Carl. Just going through the questions, there's a lot of questions around the use of technology, right? So questions about use of AI, use of blockchain. What technologies or innovation have you seen historically which has made the biggest impact for financial inclusion? And it'd be good to get your thoughts on these emerging technologies and the impact they will have on financial inclusion as well.
So it may be one of the simplest technologies, if I can put it this way, which is human adoption. Because you need the user to adopt the technology and believe that this is transforming their lives. So if I'm a merchant and I've been making sales of, let's say, $1,000 a month, and I see that there are people that come to my shop but do not have cash to pay, but they have digital means, I need to make that transition as a merchant. So it's that ability to believe that this is going to change my life. So if you go back to the definition of financial inclusion, I, as an individual, that need to feel that need. Once I feel that need, I need to find the solution provider. So in that case, I can go to a bank, financial institution, or I can go to a fintech. I can go to STC Pay, for example, in the context of Saudi. And STC Pay needs to have a solution that meets the requirement that I have or fits the solution that I'm trying to adopt. So I'll start by the user. Because by the end of the day, you can have the best technology out there, but if it's not, you don't have a user and it's not adopted, then it's not necessarily going to be the best solution out there. So that's number one. The second element to that equation is the safety and security of a transaction. I insist on this piece because if you get burnt once, you may decide, I know what, I'm not going to use this again. And the safety and security has to do with the ability of individual to trust that when I put my card into this machine or when I scan that QR code, it's going to happen. Or in my early example, if I'm buying something from a handicraft in Saudi and I'm sitting in South Africa, I will get it in my country. Now, you have, of course, new technologies that have emerged, and this technology will be adopted as individual feels that it is improving their lives. No, if you always, I like to go back to the definition, and maybe that's critical. If you look at the definition, it's really about financial inclusion is about improving the lives of the users of a community for that matter. So your technology can be as great as possible, but the fundamental question will be what problem is that technology trying to solve? So yes, you have emerging technologies. I think you mentioned the blockchain technology. This has proven to be useful in cases, for example, where you're looking at procurement, for example, and how does this facilitate the procurement in terms of being able to trace the different product. So if you're talking about artificial intelligence are being used at Visa, for example, to ensure that your payments are safe and secure, and the machine keep on learning because it sees different variation of how this is working or not working. But AI, in the context of education as well, is extremely important because you can then start to have an individual by an AI machine looking at the transaction that they are making, suggesting ways of improving their knowledge and understanding in terms of financial literacy or financial education. Or the AI machine scanning, for example, your inventory as a merchant and decide, you know what, actually, you don't sell any of this stuff. There was an interesting example that was given to me a couple of weeks, not by an AI machine, but by a small business in sustainability called the Waste Lab in Dubai, where they've been assisting hotels, restaurants by looking at the waste. And then they provide the data. Then the store manager realizes that actually we are throwing away the biryani. So biryani was made as a meal for the community, for the workers. Right. But they didn't like it, but they never said anything. But in the bin, there was an enormous amount of biryani. They changed the meal that was being offered. So technology can be that simple. And I go back to the point that it's about the user. The individual is the best way of identifying if this product makes sense or not. So the assumption by the cook that biryani was to put on the menu actually wasn't the case. And the store, they had to change the menu because clearly it was being put in the bin. So to give people a sense that it is not always the sophisticated elements that solve big problems. We have to bring it back to the human experience. And what kind of human experience are we providing to make sure that we solve a very specific problem?
I think that's a great piece of advice. Think about the customer first, and then think about how technology can apply to what the customer's circumstances are. Let's talk a little bit about the state's role in all this, right? So, and this goes. There's a few questions here about the use of decentralized blockchain networks, or should it be the state's responsibility to look at financial inclusion? What's your view on that? Has it been private sector, has been state sector, which is really driving financial inclusion within countries? Or is it a mix?
You need all actors to play the role. So if we start with the entity that regulates, the central bank, it's a central bank responsibility to give the sort of rules on how this should work. And also allow for some element of innovation to be able then to bring some elements to the market that are guided, that are supported. So I start with that, because by the end of the day, they have a guarantor of what the system should look like. Then you have the different actors, private sector, public sector, that are asking themselves the question of the vision that they want for the country for the next 15, 20 years. And then we take that vision, each entity and individual and communities have a role to play. So in my view, the government always play a central role in providing the guidance by listening to different parties. And if we look at what's happening in this region, government tend to listen a lot to be able to get to a point where they make the best decision, because they've been able to look at what's happening around the world, leveraging the technology and the competency that exists both in national government, also with different companies that are operating in the area, and eventually arrive at the position where they believe that this is the best for them. So it's an ongoing exchange. It's not a static exercise, because the reality, if you think about what's happening, for example, in Latin America, in Brazil, for example, some of the changes that we see, are some of them applicable to other parts of the world? Maybe, maybe not. But that constant knowledge sharing between central banks around the world then gives that element. So then if I look at, I like to bring things back to always to the individual, because the individual provides policymakers, provide the private sector with clues as to, is this working or not? So let's go back to the question on the experience. So recently I started reading a book called The Experience Economy, which I didn't know about it, but really sort of try to take an element and sort of create what is the experience that one can give to an individual and community. So we are thinking about fintech, the role of fintechs. People would choose a fintech solution based on the needs that they have. And depending on the experience that they get, they may decide that this is working for them or it's not working for them. So to the question that you asked fundamentally is, how do we use policies, technology, and human behavior to create the experience that makes sense to solve for financial inclusion? Because the payment piece, you can say is probably the easiest part of it. You know, you have a card, you can swipe. You have a phone, you can tap. But the reality is, can you make sure that the person does the next transaction using digital means? Which implies that the merchants have to become creative. For example, you can go now on Instagram. You have a link on Instagram that allows you to get onto a marketplace to buy what you're trying to buy. You don't need to go to the shop. It means that the sellers or the merchants have adapted to the way the buyers are behaving. Or you get sometime an email reminder that, oh, you've been buying these elements. If you think about the marketplaces, they nudge you in a certain way. So these are not isolated elements. With technology, financial inclusion becomes a little bit more intuitive. Becomes a bit more around the customer experience that you can have, basically. But you need all the different actors to play the role. It's not one versus the other. It's all together working towards that objective of the Sustainable Development Goals, which financial inclusion is a big supporter of.
No, thanks, Scott. And I always think about the individual. So I've got a really stubborn aunt who doesn't like using any digital payments, right? So she won't go online on banking. She won't like using mobile banking, internet banking. She'd prefer to just go into the bank branch. She'd prefer to hold cash. And you ask her why, And she said, well, what happens if all the payment networks fail? And what happens if we have some sort of systematic risk, which means that you can't make any payments at all, right? I'll be the one who'll be able to go buy my food and stuff. So how do you convince people like that? How do you sort of say to them, and how do you mitigate those sorts of risks which are in people's minds, especially when you're coming from an emerging market where you did face a lot of these sort of challenges in the past as well?
I mean, it's you said your grandma or your aunt?
My aunt.
Your aunt. So your aunt has all the rights to make the decision that works for her. Remember, I go back to the individual. I'll give you another example. So we work with cocoa farmers in Côte d'Ivoire. The cocoa farmers have now, about 1 million of them now are using a digital form of payment to receive the proceeds of the sales of the cocoa. What was the issue? Individuals that with bad intention know when it's payday.
Right.
And then they wait for them. They collect the cash after they sold the hard-earned cocoa, and they take the cash from them. So that was a key incentive to move away from cash to the digital, something on a card. But it required a certain level of engagement, of designing a solution that makes sense for them. So in the case of your aunt, the question is, the ones where she buys, let's say, a bread, where she buys whatever she likes to buy, are they nudging her in the direction of using digital financial services? Because by the end of the day, you always have to go back to the user. If it's working for her and there's no incentive from the merchants, because that interaction, for example, when she goes and buy the bread, for example, or she goes and buy the vegetables, that interaction with the seller, for her is equally important. And then that exchange of money, the counting, the bargaining is equally important. Can a fintech then replace that element by creating a solution that includes that element of bargaining, for example?
Yeah.
Because there might be something in the transaction that for her is important to interact. So your aunt may feel like going to the teller, she has a conversation. She has that human interaction that some people feel that digital is removing. Not necessarily, because you can still have a conversation. So responsibility, again, revolves around how do we as a community identify all the different aunts and aunties that we have that have the same behavior as your aunt, to design a solution that works for them, because she might not be a minority in that case.
I think, Carl, I'll need to give you her number so that you can have a chat with her and see how you can do it.
I'm happy to do that.
Let's move to the entrepreneurship side. So I've got a lot of questions here. Thank you. These are some amazing questions coming in. So a lot of questions around we've got people from Iraq here. Great to see you. We've got people from Egypt who have joined us, and they're talking about, look, financial inclusion is a problem there, and they want to do something about it. So what advice would you give to somebody in these markets, and even in Saudi as well, which says, look, I want to help solve financial inclusion. Where do I start? What can I be doing?
So starting point is observe and absorb. Okay. Observe the behavior around you that you feel that needs to change. Absorb in terms of what's already available in there. And how can you help an existing technology to improve what they have? Because I don't necessarily believe that if you have everyone starting that race to solve financial inclusion, we'll get there. Because there are some that are a little bit ahead of the curve. And the question then becomes, can you add to what already exists? This is critical. It's an exercise in collaboration more than anything. It's that ability to say, I see a problem. A solution may have been found already. Can I help the person who's a little bit ahead of me, or do I want to always compete? No. So I do think that there is that element of first taking that pause and say, what am I observing in the market? Does it already exist? If it doesn't exist, does it exist somewhere else in the world where I can bring that technology here? So there's a fintech on the African continent that was born out of a frustration of an individual that went to, one of the founders went to, it was the middle of the month. He had about $10 on his account, not enough to take him until the end of the month. He asked for a line of credit. They asked him to fill in about 15, 20 pages, and then to wait, somebody will get back to him. He created a fintech out of the frustration. So the question then to people that want to create, what is the frustration that you want to solve for? And you give yourself the means to solve for that frustration in a way that really solves a problem for the majority, not for the minority. So I'll give another example. I gave South Africa and Nigeria, for example, as an example earlier. South Africa has a population of 60 million people, or maybe 65 million people. Nigeria has a population of 200 plus million people. Within the African continent, you have 54 countries. Then you compare to the population of India, it's about 1.3, more or less the same population. But a South African entrepreneur may try to solve a problem for 60 million people, whereas there are 220 million in Nigeria that you could be solving for. So if you look at it from the perspective of the whole continent, it's actually not solving for the majority, it's solving for a minority. But within the context of my small country, or my country, let me not put any adjective on country, in the context of my country, the problem may look big, but in reality, it's not that big, because your addressable market, actually your proof of concept market, is the immediate one. So the 60 million in the context of Africa. But really, the addressable market is a 200 million probably in Nigeria, but also it's a 1.3 billion across the African continent. The difference there will be that the regulation will not necessarily allow you to jump from one country to the next. Whereas in India, you could potentially have that point of contact, which is 1.3 billion people. So if you look then at the sequencing of events, the government solved for the access to an ID. Okay. So digital financial services, fintech work is always linked to KYC, know your customer, as a starting point. So what is your ability to know who you're trying to solve for? In many countries, the ID is not necessarily available to all. So you already have an issue there in terms of jumping that first one, in terms of the KYC. And then talking about AML, CFT, so all the regulation in terms of anti-money laundering and counterfeit that you have. So then we go back to India. First point, most people have this form of identification. Then you have a payment system. Then now they're adding the technology for health. So the financial inclusion journey that you're trying to solve may not necessarily come from a payment perspective, but it may come from another problem that needs to be solved to make sure that more people have access. It's a long way to answer the question, but these are not straightforward. You just don't look and say, okay, I'm gonna fix. No, maybe this is not the one that you need to fix. There's a step in between that maybe you need to think about.
No, it's really, really useful insights into that. I think you're right. And if you put that into the Saudi context, it applies in the same way. You've got to look at where the customer frustrations are and think about the customer journey, not just in the payments, but what do they actually want to achieve? What are their goals? What are their objectives? And then look at the frustrations around that to look at how financial inclusion works. Just going through, we've got a lot of questions. A couple of questions which popping out. Cryptocurrency, that's something which people have been asking for, and quantum computing. What are your thoughts on those two in particular, just around financial inclusion?
I mean, this one, I have allowed to say I am not 100% familiar with this to speak with the same knowledge. So I don't think I want to sort of speculate. They are very important technical questions. So I'll have to make sure that I don't give an answer for the sake of giving one. So forgive me, but this one, I'll plead ignorance on this one.
Sure. Okay, excellent. I think we've covered quite a few of the questions. Kareem, have I missed anything? Or Lena, have I missed anything in particular that you've seen that we haven't covered?
I think you've covered it, Sagar, but we did see a lot of questions around financial inclusion and your outlook, Carl, on financial inclusion in Saudi Arabia in the next few years, and what your thoughts are on that, or the region itself.
So the region is, I would say, in an interesting place because access to financial services is available almost for anyone. Yeah. So the question in the region is really around that responsibility, that ability to be safe and secure online, that ability to make the right choices in terms of the product that you use, the ability to be able to manage your finances in a way that you don't end up using financial inclusion to become indebted. Now, there's that element that yes, access is available, but how do I use my access to grow my capital? And financial inclusion in the region, as we could see in the numbers in Saudi, are actually on the ascendant. You'll probably get to a place where more people, the access is not the issue, it's a responsibility piece that is important. And how do we maintain responsible users that make decisions that is helping them and the community to leverage the capital that is available? Because people do have access in the region. So in terms of the future, this part of the world can be a leader in ensuring that responsible financial inclusion is applied, so that we don't get in a situation where financial inclusion becomes a problem to solve because of some of the aspects in terms of management of debt, for example.
And just your thoughts on that from an SME and micro SME perspectives. You've got a question here around that being a big part of Vision 2030 and supporting the growth of SMEs. Is that financial inclusion an area there? Does it work along the same lines as consumers, or are they
absolutely? So COVID-19 showed, for example, that most of the SMEs that did not have an online presence suffered. But to have an online presence, what does it mean today? It can be an Instagram account with a link that allows you to receive payment. It can be on any of the platform. You can decide to be working with Moonshot, for example, in the Kingdom of Saudi to be supported. You can work with Fintech Saudi to be connected to the digital world. So I think those opportunities exist. And if you want to be able to help a micro to become small and eventually medium and why not a big business, it's that ability to actually access markets. So if you then look at the GCC or you look at the Kingdom of Saudi, there are 30 million people plus. Most of them are young people working in the creative industries, working in the gaming industry, and so on, and so they have something to sell. The question is which platform are they using to sell? And can then take what they're doing in Saudi as sort of a proof of concept in that 30 million and expand it into the GCC, expand it into the African market, into Asia and other parts of the world. Because that's really what this should be. You don't create an M to remain a micro. There needs to be some form of progression into small, medium, and eventually a bigger one. But to take that road, number one, you need access to market, because the access to market that will convince others to provide the capital that you need. It can be angel investors, it can be friend and family, it can be the financial institution. But the starting point, someone must trust your numbers. And when it comes to the numbers, the world has agreed that the best way is to have a way of recording that you cannot tweak. Use your digital financial services. If a customer came and tapped the phone or the card and the sale was 100, then it's 100. And then you can demonstrate the cash flow that is available and why anyone should help you grow your business to expand the market. So from a small business perspective, it's really that ability to leverage the digital economy by saying, okay, I'm going to be part of a digital of an online market, on the marketplace. Sorry, I'm going to be part of thinking about how do I export my products and how I want to engage. There's an interesting, when a meeting at the end of February or March, February in Abu Dhabi, and there was a small business called Early Riser from Bahrain that was on the stage, and in the audience we had His Excellency the Minister of Trade of Saudi. At the end of the session, he had that beautiful gesture where he went to her and gave his card because she was talking about exporting her products from Bahrain to the kingdom. He gave a card, they had this conversation. So you could see here that you have one of the highest ranking officials of the kingdom that sees that there's a small business, actually a micro business, that is she's producing granola, that is talking about expanding a market and is willing to provide that support. And that's what it's about. It's really about opening those markets for small or for medium entrepreneurs so that they can grow by having a larger market.
Amazing.
And really, that's what it's about for the kingdom, that ability to attract, but also to make sure that all the small businesses that are created become bigger by exporting and expanding markets.
Excellent. Carl, thank you very much for your time. Look, we've had some great questions and thank you for your answers. One final question, which we will ask all our guests is, if somebody is learning about financial inclusion, they're super excited listening to you here, what can they do? Where can they learn more about financial inclusion? Are there any specific resources that you suggest that they look at to learn more about data points, about problems, about case studies?
So I'll ask them to go back to the definition. When they look at the definition, and if they apply this definition to a situation that they see, the question then becomes, what is missing that I want to fix? Because by the end of the day, we are all responsible to make financial inclusion better. But if we all remember what the definition is about, and in my case, in terms of a role that I hold today, is really supporting micro and small businesses. And by supporting them, there are different ways of doing it and different people do different things. But the key part for me is how do they have the required skills to thrive in the digital economy? So that's what I want to be able to contribute to. For another person, it could be how do I ensure that every single small business have a logistic that they require to move their goods within the country or beyond the borders of the country. It could be also, can I be part of the supply chain? If they're producing something that they have to export to be able to produce, can I be the one that start producing locally to give them at a lower cost? So there are different ways, but it always goes back to the fundamental point around the ability to observe what's happening, absorb what's happening in the ecosystem, and make that decision in terms of, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
And sorry, just on that, any resources that you'd suggest that they go and look at? So anything online?
I mean, the Findex report that by the World Bank is an excellent source of information that one can go and have a look at. You can also look at what the respective central bank produce in terms of reports and look at how those numbers are improving over time. And maybe it's not necessarily about financial inclusion, but you can look also at the work that is done by UNCTAD. So it's a UN Trade and Development Organization. So if you think about the world trade, you have three organizations. You have the WTO, the World Trade Organization. You have ITC, the International Trade Center, which is focused on capacity building for SMEs. And you have UNCTAD, who publishes this report every year on competitiveness. It's a brilliant source of information in terms of understanding how the world is moving through the lens of trade.
Excellent. Carl, thank you very much again for joining us.
You're welcome.
Really
it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for staying on here as well. And all these wonderful questions. This is a great start to Fintech Summer Sessions. Really looking forward to seeing this energy continuing. Next week, we have a great session on payment innovation in financial services. So this week, we've set the scene with financial inclusion, a super important topic. And for the next few weeks, we're going to build on that. But we're going to look at specific technology, specific business and sector use cases related to fintech. So please do join us again for next week as well. And please do join us for the following weeks. Again, there is still time. If you've got friends that want to join and they're itching to come on board, or they're saying, hey, how can I spend my evenings on Tuesday in this heat? Then please do tell them about Fintech Summer Sessions, because this is a great place for us to all learn and grow together as well. So Carl, thank you again for joining us.
You're welcome.
And look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you for the invitation. I really enjoyed it.
Take care. Everyone else, if you want to stay online and you have any few questions, we've got a few minutes now, so we can answer some of those questions that you have. Anything you want to learn about Fintech Saudi, about Fintech generally in Saudi, happy to answer some questions with you all right now. So we'll stay on for a few minutes. If you've got some, great. If not, enjoy the rest of your evening. There is a great football match happening. England's playing, so do try and support them as well if you can. So we've got a few questions. So Reader's got a question. How can fintech enhance financial inclusion? How can traditional financial institutions contribute to promoting financial inclusion? Great question. I think we covered quite a bit of that over here as well. It is very much about understanding the customers. It's about understanding the price points, the income points of those customers. A lot of those customers are underserved by large institutions. That's one of the areas where fintechs can play a role. So we have seen in cases, for example, in the Kingdom, where we've seen peer-to-peer lenders come in to be able to offer SMEs a better interest rate for debt than big banks can do. So I think there is a role which traditional financial institutions could play, but there is also roles for fintechs to play in those underserved markets as well. So that's hopefully answers that question. The Saudi allow crypto transactions. Mahmoud, no, there is no regulations around crypto at the moment in the kingdom. We understand that that might be something which is developed, but nothing happening at the moment. But we will certainly update you if there is.
Sagar, there's a question from Hosni asking about exporting his company or his fintech into KSA and about the regulations associated with it. So maybe, I don't know if you saw that question.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm just looking now. So thank you for that question. So coming into Saudi Arabia, we love international fintechs. We've got a lot of international fintech companies coming into Saudi. The first point of call is MISA. So the Ministry of Investment looks at a lot of the areas around supporting companies to come in the kingdom. So do visit their website. They have a lot of good resources and support for companies that want to come into the kingdom. The second point of call is Fintech Saudi. So we have a lot of resources around the regulation and the aspects within the kingdom, who you need to be regulated by, what licensing you need to go to. So we do have a Fintech Access Guide that we can share. We'll share it in the Telegram group, which will give you hopefully a lot of the answers that you're looking for.
We had another question. We had another question on discounted services and Fintech Saudi's support on that. So that's something that we can talk about as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we do support fintechs with different types of discounted services. So we do have different subsidy or grant programs to support fintech. So there is a MACIN program, which is around cybersecurity and cloud services. There is the Fintech Hub, which provides space. There's our internship program, where we support small startups with hiring interns. And there's also discounted services, which are perks, Fintech Saudi perks from different organizations, be it related to cybersecurity, co-working spaces, other areas as well, accounting and softwares and so forth. So that's something, if that's something of interest, do get in touch with us at info@fintechsaudi.com and we can share more information with you. We've seen some questions here on the internship. So internships will be open to everyone. It comes down to the companies who they're looking to hire. So the companies themselves will set the criteria of what skill set they're looking, what background they're looking for, and then it's very much for people to apply to the positions that they're most interested in. Shout out anything else you think, Kareem?
I think it's worth talking about our idea accelerator. I'm seeing a couple of questions around that. So maybe on supporting fintechs at the early stage, maybe we can tell them about our idea accelerator.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Idea Accelerator is a program which we launched, which really helps anybody from the stage of I've got a fintech idea, or I want to do something in fintech, to building a full-fledged business plan. And that takes you through a whole entrepreneurship journey. A lot of the things that Carl talked about today is covered in that, around looking at the customer experience, how do you utilize different technologies and business models. So we are currently in reboot for that. We're developing the program. We're going to be launching that very soon, and we'd love to have you on board with that. So that's a program. If you're interested, again, we will share the details with you. Do stay in touch, follow the socials, be on the Telegram group, and you will definitely hear about that program.
So we've got some housekeeping questions, Sagar. Maybe we want to quickly tackle those. A few related to the certificate and making sure you're logged in. Maybe just reiterate that, please.
Yeah, sure. So as Kareem very kindly said on the first on this week 0 session, please do log in with the same email if you can. That allows us to track you've been logging in. Now, I've seen some questions here about, is this the first, is this the second session? So what we've always had is 10 weeks. What we did different this year was we had a week 0, and that was really a refresher. That was for people who don't know anything about fintech, wants to learn a little bit more about fintech, wants to learn a bit about Fintech Saudi. That was week 0. If you attended that, it still counts towards your 8 sessions you need for a certificate. So if you logged into that, great, but you have 10 more weeks of us as well to enjoy, starting from this week. So yeah, as long as you log in with the right email, you'll be, and as long as you attend at least 8 sessions over the 11 that we have had, you will get a certificate.
And maybe if we can talk about, sorry, I saw a question. I just passed through. Sorry about that.
So I've got some questions here. Yeah, it is every Tuesday, Sarah. So we will be having the Fintech Summer Sessions every Tuesday at exactly the same time for the next 10 weeks. I think we've covered most questions, right, Kareem?
I think the majority of them has been covered. We're sorry. I see some people that we might have missed their questions. We're trying to cover as many questions as possible. So if you have a question that we've missed, we've got next week, we'll definitely take a look at it and get back to you on that. But I think we've covered most of those. I have one from Abdulaziz here, maybe one last one, Sagar, from Abdulaziz asking, an incubator is provided by Fintech Saudi that are actively seeking to invest in startups. So maybe talk about investment in fintechs at the earlier stages just a bit and give us a sense of that in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, sure. So we're quite blessed in Saudi Arabia to have quite a broad range of investors, even at the earlier stages. So there are a lot of accelerator programs, the likes of Sanabil 500, the likes of Plug and Play, which provide you with a lot of the support, and there might be investment related to that as well. We have angel networks like Riyadh Angel Networks, Saudi Angel Networks, which are all there to support small businesses. And then there are a few venture builders, incubators out there as well. So there's a lot of different sources of funding now available. This wasn't the case a few years ago, but I think we've seen a lot of development in the marketplace and a lot of opportunities there. So that's become a reduced barrier to entry for a lot of people who want to start businesses, having that level of investment and support. And it's not just the money, it's also having the right individuals supporting you, the right mentors, the right people, advisors to support you on that journey when it can be really, really difficult at the beginning as well. So I hope that answers your question. We do have a directory on our website where you can see some of those investors. So I would encourage you to have a look at those as well to see if there's any good fits for what you're looking for.
Sagar, one last question for you from our attendees. So tell us more about going through the journey of building a fintech. So let's say I start here with the Fintech Summer Sessions. What's next for me other than the certificate? What's next for me? What should I do and what can Fintech Saudi do for me?
So thank you for a very long last question, Kareem. So fintech. So this is where your journey starts. A lot of people's journey starts with learning about fintech, right? Getting excited about fintech, maybe thinking about starting a career in fintech. But if you then want to take this knowledge to starting a fintech business, we've got some really good sessions coming up, particularly week 9 and 10, where we cover investments, we cover regulations. So definitely stick around for those sessions as well. And then we have the programs such as the Idea Accelerator, which supports you with developing your idea into a fintech solution. And then we also have other programs which support you with actually getting regulated. So very much it's about your personal journey, about what you'd like to do in entrepreneurship. We do have a lot of meetup events as well in the kingdom, and that's very much about supporting entrepreneurs to meet with others, maybe other co-founders, maybe finding other mentors, maybe finding investors. And so there's a series of meetups that we always publish online. They're open to the community, and there'll be registrations on social media from time to time. We also have a fintech tour where we do go to cities around the kingdom. So if you're not in Riyadh, doesn't mean that you'll miss out. We will still come and visit you, and we would love to understand more about your solutions. But it is very much about getting in touch with Fintech Saudi. Register as a fintech company with us because then you'll get all the updates about all the different programs that we have.
I think that's it, Sagar. Thank you, Sagar. Thank you, Carl. And thank you all for having been with us today, and see you next Tuesday.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.